Today I'm going to make a case that Switzerland is going to be much better positioned to handle a lot of the transitions that are taking place in the world than almost any other country on Earth, and why this is structurally the case, and therefore why it is unsurprising that a lot of wealthy people have been moving to Switzerland, and you might want to move to Switzerland. Now, I was in Switzerland, whatever it was, I think last summer or the summer before, something like that. Anyway, I made some videos from Switzerland. It's of course a famously beautiful place. It's relatively safe. It's, quite clean. There's a bunch of things that you can appreciate about Switzerland. But there's a particular thing about Switzerland that maybe people are not so aware of that I want to dive into for today's video and talk about in the context of kind of the global problems and how purely by accident, they have this very interesting antidote to those problems. So let's dive in and talk about them now. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Thank you. Welcome for being here. I am Michael. This is Offshore Citizen, and we are international corporate structuring, international tax relocation specialists. So we specialize in how do you utilize global structures, the different countries in the world, relocating to other countries, different banking systems, etc., to optimize your life, to optimize your business, to keep more of what you earn. And if those things are interesting to you, you should reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendar.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. I very often, over the last number of years, have kind of thought about, what is the biggest problems facing society today? And I've made some videos about this in the past, I think as early as in COVID. And in general, the sort of mental model that I've had is the major problem in the world is the explosion of complexity and scale. Most of our most serious problems are sort of downstream from those two things. And you can sort of logically think of why this is the case, because our biology and our sociology are not really designed to handle these issues, right? So biologically, we were born in a fairly simple environment. We didn't have to deal with high scale effects in the vast majority of cases. We didn't have to deal with high complexity in the vast majority of cases. We're kind of hunters and gatherers by our sort of history, and we would be in small groups. And so you could kind of gauge what was going on. Things wouldn't change very dramatically. This was sort of the reality of early humans, right? That was kind of the area that we evolved in. As time has passed, we have developed various different coordination structures, and that coordination helps to give us the major advantage as kind of a species, right? If you sort of think one ape versus one human, the ape will win. 10 apes versus 10 humans, apes will probably also win. 100 apes versus 100 humans, the humans will win 10 times out of 10. Why? Because we are better at coordinating than they are. And so a great deal of our success to this day is if you can learn to coordinate well together. If you look at the Roman legions, right? They were very good at coordinating together. If you looked at the American cavalry versus Native Americans, Native American individual was probably greatly superior to a cavalry officer, but they did not coordinate as well as American cavalry did. And you can go through lots and lots and lots of examples of this. Coordination is like this really, really key thing. But our systems of coordination that we have, so this is capitalism, this is democracy, this is, corporate structures, this is, all the different ways that we've figured out how to be, this is broadcast media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These have all been designed for relatively low scale, low complexity systems, okay? And technology has come along, and it has heightened complexity massively, and it has heightened scale massively. This creates three great crises, what I refer to. So you have the collective crisis of sense making. It's harder to make sense of the world in this highly complex, high scale environment. We have the collective crisis of competence, right? Which is that as the world becomes more and more complex, then our relative knowledge, skill, et cetera, declines, even if it remains sort of the same, right, in absolute terms. And we have a collective crisis of meaning, right, because it's harder to sort of see the difference that you're making in this high complexity, high scale world that appears random. There's all kinds of different side effects of that. There's what I call the gambling thesis from investing and all sorts of stuff. But the interesting question is, well, how do you deal with some of those problems? And I think the way that you deal with a bunch of them is you kind of hyper-localize, okay? So a bunch of these things because they are very big. So for example, you get kind of tragedy of the commons, things that happen when you have large insurance companies, right? So if you think about insurance, the original insurance was barn building. Your friend's barn burnt down, so you would go and help them to build a new one, so that when your barn burns down, they would come and help you to build a new one. And this was kind of the original concept of insurance, right? Works pretty well. You don't have fraud because people aren't just randomly burning their barns down. You know those people, you have a high degree of respect for them. It works pretty well. But when you've got millions of people signing up for insurance, what you get is you get a high incentive for fraud, you get adversarial dynamics between the company and the customers, which is really not good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these become like these very negative emergent characteristics. So to a large extent, what you want to do is you want to try and force things locally. And it is locally that you have community, it is where you have people who deeply care about each other, they look after each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That hasn't worked so well in a lot of the world. A lot of the world is facing a bunch of problems that come from social media and come from, again, just these high scale, high complexity systems. You see a breakdown of the standard advice that you would give to kids, like what do you do? Well, you go to school and you go to university and you get a degree and then you get a good job and then you work at a company for 40 years. This no longer works, right? Nowadays, like you have to be highly adaptive. And if you're not, like the basic premise should be, listen, you need to be looking at the world, constantly learning, not taking anything for granted, having agency, continually adapting to the changes that are going on, to see the next opportunity to jump on it, and don't expect that the job you have this year is going to exist in 3 years. Just give up that concept and be adaptive. That's like sort of the modern world. Well, in that context, Switzerland is kind of interesting. Switzerland's already a small country, right? So you might say like just in general, it's sort of hyper-localized. And some people, when I talk to them about, you know, how one country works better than another country, the frequent criticism that I will hear is that place is small. And I think this is usually kind of a cop-out because like how small is small? How big is big? You know, you can see lots of counter, if you start to like dig into it, it doesn't really pass the sniff test. You can see, for example, you might say, oh, well, you know, the US is quite dangerous, and, you know, Singapore is quite safe, but Singapore is small, and the US is big. And you're like, yeah, but Japan has 120 million people, and it's super safe like Singapore. So what are we talking about here? So you get some of these breakdowns, right? Anyway, the point is, you have this already small environment. But then within this small environment, this country of like 10 million people that is geographically like one of the smallest in Europe, you have got like 28 cantons. And so that's like their little provinces, right? And they make a ton of their decision making at the very local level. So it's very messy politics, right? There's lots of like disputes and different, like lots of voting and kind of lots of sort of involvement, et cetera. But like think about the wisdom of that, because it sort of is a natural antidote to a lot of the complexity and scale. You're making decisions on a very small scale level where you can have insights into what's going on. Let's think about sort of George Washington to, you know, Obama, right? George Washington, 1776, you got Declaration of Independence, he becomes the first president. What was society like there? Well, mostly you had people who were sort of same religion, same, like it's an agrarian society, right? So people were farmers, maybe they have like a little bit of smithing, a little bit of mining, you know, a little bit of military, basically Christian, Judeo-Christian type religion. Pretty homogeneous. So could that one person be qualified to make a decision for all the people in the society? Pretty well, like he could understand them. Fast forward to Obama. You go to pick any one city, right? Any major city in there. How many jobs are there? There's like thousands of jobs, probably tens of thousands of jobs. How many different like religions and backgrounds are there? What all things did you have to worry about? There you had to worry about, you know, the military. They didn't have like a public education system. They didn't have a public medical system. They didn't, you know, like not much you had to worry about. Here, I mean, you've got waste management, you've got roads, you've got medical, you've got education, you've got defense, you've got courts, you've got, you know, you just start running down, like it's just an impossible task for somebody to be a master of all those things and to have deep insight into all those things, let alone be able to make good decisions for that very broad base of people. Whereas if you say, okay, well, we're in this small canton in Switzerland and we're gonna make our own decisions, we're gonna have like a lot of direct democracy. Okay, what's that gonna do? Well, we're probably going to make decisions that are more relevant to us. You know, it's a super interesting thing. if you go and you want to get citizenship in Switzerland, like your neighbors vote on whether you can get citizenship. Think about that. Like, imagine how that changes the structure of a society. If, I'm from Canada originally, right? So in Canada, you can come to Canada, you can, get a PR, you can not integrate at all, you can not get to know anyone at all, you can not learn the language, you can spend 3 to 5 years, and you can qualify for citizenship. How good is that for the cohesion of that system? Not very good. Not very good, right? Like, just obviously it's not very good. Is it much better if you say, okay, you get transplanted and we have sort of hyper-localized governance, etc. You better be good friends with your sort of local people. You better have they better think highly of you because they're ultimately going to vote on whether you get to become a citizen. How is that going to change the incentive structure? It's going to change the incentive structure positively. Like, of course Switzerland is doing better than most of the rest of the world. How could they not be? Of course, not to say that Switzerland doesn't have problems. Switzerland does have problems. Not to say that Switzerland hasn't benefited from various different natural advantages. Of course, no, there's historic reasons why Switzerland does better. They didn't get destroyed during World War II. That was good for them, of course. But there is also this very major advantage of a system which is naturally much more hyper-localized and drives a different set of incentives and drives a different level of participation than you would get in most of these other areas. So anyway, all of this to say, I don't hear anyone talking about this on Switzerland. Of course, there's many people who want to move to Switzerland. The wages are some of the highest in the world. You certainly have pretty functional education, pretty functional healthcare. Like I said, it's clean, it's safe. There's a bunch of stuff that works really well about Switzerland. There are trade-offs, always. There's reasons that people don't necessarily want to be there. You will have an extremely hard time finding real estate in Zug, but there are these advantages. And so I think that's a reason to believe that Switzerland will probably have longevity as a fairly successful society much longer than many of the surrounding countries and many of the other places in the world, just for those structural reasons. So let me know what you guys think. Put it in the comments below. If you want help with, relocating abroad, dealing with all this stuff, setting up in multiple countries, etc., 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 please reach out to us, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.